Good morning. Thank you, Pastor Bob, for inviting me here this morning, and it's an honor to be with all of you today. I'm Kassie, and I work as a case manager and advocate at Damascus Road Project. So I work directly with the women who are survivors of human trafficking. Human trafficking generates $236 billion in illegal profits annually worldwide. It involves the exploitation of a person through force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of commercial sex or forced labor. Victims are targeted by traffickers due to a variety of vulnerabilities. They are often manipulated through promises of love, food, shelter, fear, fame, and a sense of belonging or employment, then coerced and forced into manual labor, prostitution, or sexual exploitation, and children are especially at risk. Traffickers use social media, mobile devices, and interacting gaming as tools to access, to build relationships. And really, the traffickers uses technology at every stage of their crime. So Damascus Road Project is a local 501c3 nonprofit faith-based organization that began in 2009. It is dedicated to raising awareness and assisting victims of human trafficking in Oshkosh, the Fox Valley, and throughout Wisconsin. By presenting prevention education to schools, churches, community groups, we also partner with law enforcement to locate victims and provide aftercare resources to the survivors. Since 2017, Damascus Road Project has assisted over 743 survivors. We offer free community awareness trainings, and these trainings will discuss common recruitment tactics used by traffickers, red flag indicators, myth and truths about trafficking, prevention tips, and more. We have a Scarlet Cord prayer ministry that was started in 2011 as a brothel prayer ministry, matching a prayer sponsor with a woman who was working in one of the legal brothels in Nevada. However, today, this prayer ministry has been modified so that those who would like to become a prayer partner would be praying for someone here that we work with directly at Damascus Road. The prayer sponsor prays for safety, restoration, addictions to be broken, freedom from her past, financial stability, healing for her mind, body, and soul. We pray that she will know her self-worth and find hope and ultimately salvation. If you would like to become a prayer sponsor and hear more about the ways you can get involved with Damascus Road to combat human trafficking right here, I invite you to visit me at after service this morning, and we can talk more. And I just thank you again for this time.
This morning, I want to get into a message called Stay on the Potter's Wheel. And this is a topic that, there's songs written about the potter's hand. There's songs written about this very topic. There's a church called the Potter's House. Have you ever heard of a Bishop T.D. Jakes? That's his church. There's a lot of references to pottery in Scripture and our lives and how God molds us and makes us into who he wants us to be. But the thing about pottery is, has anyone ever tried pottery before? Okay, it's interesting. It's a very interesting process. And, recently my little guy, Noah, he wanted a potter's wheel for for a gift at some point. So December 14th, we celebrate Gotcha Day. Okay, every December 14th, that's the day that James and Emma's adoption became finalized. And so they get a gift and we go out to eat and celebrate. And of course, Noah, by default, he gets one, because it just wouldn't make much sense for the two olders to get something. He's like, I'm left out. So we got him a potter's wheel, and it was just kind of this mindset that you just take a blob of clay and plunk, and it's going to form into a pot. It doesn't realize it's a messy process. All right. If you've ever dealt with a potter's wheel before, you get the pottery going. If you overwet it and you hit the gas, because there's a gas pedal, you're going to be glad you have an apron on at that point. There's a lot of different things that come with pottery, and it's something that a lot of people have wanted to try. There's a lot of things people have no desire to try, but it's always something that, whether you like pottery or not, when you see the finished product, you're like, whoa, that's actually a really cool thing. There's some tips, though, some points I want to make, though, regarding staying on the potter's wheel. All right. So I got 4 points for you this morning. And the first one is that God uses difficulties to shape us, and we should stay on the potter's wheel. All right. There's a lot of things that we face in life. In Jeremiah chapter 18, verses 1-6, it says this. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Go down to the potter's house, and there I will give you my message. So I went down to the potter's house, and I saw him working at the wheel. But the pot he was shaping from the clay was marred in his hands. So the potter formed it into another pot, shaping it as seemed best to him. Then the word of the Lord came to me. He said, Can I not do with you, Israel, as this potter does, declares the Lord? Like clay in the hand of the potter, so are you in the hand of Israel. To get on a pottery wheel, to get something on the pottery wheel, you got to take a chunk of clay. That's pottery 101. Now you're that much smarter in pottery. you need something on there, okay? And it can't be Play-Doh, okay? Play-Doh will fall apart. It can't be silly putty, because it'll just turn into a ball and bounce away. It's got to be clay. It's got to be thick, heavy clay that's hard to mold and move around. And when you start throwing a pot, that's the term they use for making a pot. It's throwing a pot on the potter's wheel. That there's a lot of things that would say, I'm going to give up, I'm not going to do this, not for me, too messy, all of that stuff. And that's reminiscent of how our life is. When God places us on the potter's wheel, the fact is, there's a lot of life's uncomfortable situations that come with who we are. When we stand and look in that person in the mirror, there's a lot of things that have been uncomfortable in the past. There are a lot of mistakes that have been made in the past. There's a lot of things that we regret we've done. Okay, there's a lot of things that we wish we would have done. All right. Being transparent, I look back on my 21 years of being here. There's a lot of mistakes that I made. There are a lot of things that I wish I could have been better at, but it's a learning process. When you are at your job, when you are parenting, there's a lot of things that you wish you could have done better. But God takes us, blemishes and all, and puts us on there. And in modern days, and in today, there's a lot of things that could get worked out of who we are as clay. All right. There's a lot of uncomfortable situations. There's the situations like traffic. If you get behind a slow driver, I don't know how some of you do with that. This Milwaukee boy doesn't do well. Tracy reminded me early on when we moved to Wapaka, you got to stop honking at people. People know each other in a small town. All right. And I started realizing I laid on the horn behind this, I'm going to say it, old lady. And, and every stop sign, I'm like, come on, let me motivate you by the word of the Lord. Interpret that. No, and so I'd hit the horn, and eventually we're getting to Pick and Save. I'm like, oh no, she's turning in. And Tracy's like, told you, that sort of thing. It was a lady I knew that knew me for decades. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Hi, Glenna. And she's like, you need to slow down. I'm like, okay. But there's irritating people. I was that irritating person to her. Apostle Paul talks about a continual thorn in his flesh. Doesn't define who it was, what it was, but there was that moment. There's irritating people in our lives. You clock in at work, clock, tick, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, It's that Seinfeld Newman thing. Hello, Newman. You know, like you just know that person's waiting for you. It could be so many other irritating people in your life that we don't know about. And you're like, God, why? I was having such a great weekend and now here it is. You know, this is, we're doing this. There's delays, there's disappointments. And I would argue that those things are not necessarily accidents. All of those things that we face in life, they may seem like so random, but they're really not accidents. God the potter places us on his wheel to reveal impurities like impatience, okay, pride, that's another one that can come in there, jealousy, that he wants to remove from our lives. All of these things that go into a beautiful pot comes from a clump of clay that has a lot of these things in it. And these lumps, you start on the wheel, you go slow, you get your hands really wet, you turn that clay almost into mud, and you start going and your hands are going like this because it's not centered. And so you got to use your muscles and lean into it a little bit and get that thing to where it needs to be. So it starts looking like what's in the picture. A nice centered pot, a chunk of clay that's sitting right there. And these lumps in the clay are opportunities. You see a lump in your clay, that's an opportunity to fix that, to smooth it out. There's a setback. Oh no, there's an air bubble in it. Get that out. Well, now that just left a big hole in it, okay? Now we got to work that out and get that back to where it needs to be. And these aren't setbacks. If you're trying to throw your first pot or your 100th pot, these aren't setbacks. You're like, okay, a blemish, boom, get it back. And now it's going to be able to move forward into something that you really want. It's what's called a refining process. Okay, you're taking something that's imperfect and making it as perfect as possible. Romans chapter 5, verse 3-4 says, not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope. This is the way. Okay. It almost has a little bit of a Yoda sound to a little bit of a Yoda reading. But not only so, but we also glory in sufferings because it produces ultimately hope. A refining process is something, one of the shows we go to on TV is Forged in Fire. Okay, you ever seen that show? It makes anybody that doesn't have, any guy, potentially ladies too, that doesn't have a forge, makes you want to go out in the garage and say, honey, car's parked outside, I'm making a forge. All right, I'm going to make a sword. But there's a refining process that everything goes through. When a jeweler makes a gold ring, there's a refining process. They don't just take the latest chunk of gold and say, okay, we'll make it into a ring. There's a refining process that takes place. And so all of these things lead to where God wants us to be. So in high school, actually starting in junior high, my favorite course of all of them, it wasn't lunch, it wasn't gym, it was art class. I always have loved art class. And so starting in high school, you got to pick specifically in a larger high school what art class you want. Our high school had, Wauwatosa East High School even had its own swimming pool. It had an Olympic-sized swimming pool on one half, and then there was a part that you could walk through, and there were bleachers over there, so when you came in to gym class and you were in your swimsuit and you're walking over to the bleachers, inevitably somebody does that to you, and in goes Tim, or in goes Bob, and the teacher looks and gets all mad, and you're like, I slipped, I don't know what happened there. But so they could afford and so on the other side of the Olympic-sized swimming pool was an Olympic diving well, complete with an underwater classroom, so the dive teachers could watch the dives as they enter the water. That's indicative of how much they put into their art program as well. So you could take jewelry class, you could take pottery, you could take so many different things and have that for a whole semester. I went for drawing, I went for pottery, and I went for jewelry. Made some really cool things. But pottery class is where I learned this biggest lesson. We started throwing pots on the wheel. Teacher said, make sure you get rid of all the blemishes in your pot because these are going to go into the kiln, the refining process. As Bob goes, in one ear, out the other, blah, 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 keep yapping, it's a chunk of clay, that sort of thing. I started making my pot, and And the pot that I have in my office right now at my house is not the original pot. Why? Because I didn't listen. I was like, we can hide the blemishes. We can hide these sort of things. So it was time for the pot to go into the kiln with about 7 other ones, because it was a large kiln right in the classroom. And the next day I get to class. The teacher goes, I need to talk to you. All right, I'm on honor roll. That wasn't the case. She goes, when I talk to you about taking care of the blemishes in your pot, did you listen to me? And I said it as any good Christian young man would. Yeah, I didn't. She goes, because you didn't follow my directions, you owe 7 other kids in this classroom an apology. I said, what for? She goes, you didn't refine, you didn't get the blemishes out and all this stuff. And there was a massive air bubble hidden in your pottery that you made, that when it got to a certain point, it blew up and took out all the other pots. Now, I'll admit, as a boy, there was a part of me saying, that's awesome. However, that was not a good thing to do, all right? And it taught me the importance of wait through it, go through it, get everything out that needs to get out. Because, in that story, we need to recognize difficulties as God's tool for your growth. The difficulty that I would have faced getting the blemishes out is also reflective of the difficulties in our own life. What difficulties in our life do we have that God's saying, you know what, you've been a Christian for 20 years. You've been a Christian for 30 years. What is there that needs to get out of your life? What is it that needs to get out of your life that's going to propel you down and make you go a little further? What is it that needs to get out of our life so that God says, now I got that out. Let's keep refining. Let's keep going. Let's keep making you who you are supposed to be. So we have to choose to be moldable, allowing God to take shape, to shape your character. Because there's a danger of getting off the potter's wheel. Number one, it's a danger to resist God's refinement. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11, it says, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but it's painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. The Israelites, an 11-day journey to the promised land. It became a 40-year journey because they repeatedly resisted God's process by complaining and rebelling constantly. An 11-day journey turned into a 40-day journey. You ever driven with your kids on a long road trip? This is only supposed to be 12 hours, but I feel like I'm in purgatory. That it's we have those moments. The Israelites experienced that. And when we respond to the trials with frustration, bitterness, and impatience, we get stuck. I know God wants to do this in my life, but I am not going to do it. I'm going to dig my heels in. Everything's fine. Everything's going to be okay. I'm not dealing with this right now. And so over and over, God's like, can I have that piece of you? And like the pottery, right? When God removes something from you, when you give something to God, here's the real side of it. Whether it's an addiction, substance or visual, whether it's, just name it. When you give that to God, there is a chunk of your life gone. That was part of you. Good or bad, that chunk is gone. There's a part of you missing. And so, like the pottery, when you see a big chunk of dry clay in the side of a beautiful pot, you take that out because you know it's bad. And guess what? This beautiful pot now has a chunk in it. That's where we come to God and say, God, this is made up who I am, good or bad. But God, you can fill this. For instance, maybe we like hanging out at a certain place or with certain people that we just know is not right. But you enjoy the fellowship, okay? Fellowship can be more than just a churchy word. Fellowship is just hanging out, even in a fishing boat with a couple guys that you're visiting, you're fellowshipping. But that could be a bad situation for you. But I like the opportunity to be with friends and be out and do things. And God's saying, but I can plug you into a really good church where you're going to get that. There'll be a chunk missing. Sure, change is hard. But there's a part where you can also let God fill that and point you in a better direction. But God wants us to pass tests, not run away from them. It builds character that can handle the blessings he has planned for us. And we all have those moments where we can blow our stack. But you know what? Let God do something with you. I've had a couple moments over the last 20 years. And it's funny because it's kind of like, well, they're not technically my people. I'll get a business owner that I'll bump into and they'll say, I remember specifically many years ago, one of them came up to me and said, I had a weird conversation with somebody that was at my business and just really got loud and boisterous and mean. And then the words, don't they go to your church? That sort of thing. I'm like, yeah, they must have skipped that week on the sermon or something, But here's a fact. It's human. It's the human side. All right. It's the human thing that we deal with. But if we let God continue to move in us, we start learning more and more, okay, God's refining me in this area. And what once bothered you a lot, all of a sudden becomes kind of not a big issue anymore. We get a proper perspective on life. You get somebody who has been dealt a blow of something huge health-wise that could even potentially be terminal. And I'll show you a person that views life way differently than somebody who is just motoring through life. You learn to value things more. You learn to look at life differently. You learn to say, this is not so important. And you learn to keep your cool in a lot of areas. And so God's refining us. He wants to refine us. And we have to resist the urge to complain or retaliate. I don't want that to happen. I don't want to deal with that. But view each trial as a test of our character and commitment to God's refining work. I can't say that enough about refining. There have been areas in my life, even over the last couple of years, where I'm just like, I don't want to deal with it. Don't want to go through it. But I did. And I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for going through those situations, recognizing in an area of life, I need help. Okay? And then reaching out for help. Recognizing who you are. When my dad passed away, I looked at my life. They always say, midlife crisis sort of moments. For anyone in their 50s, you're past the midlife. you're like motoring on. You got one foot in the casket, one on a banana peel, as they say. You're going. And you start realizing more and more like, I got to get things working. Or I got to keep letting God mold us, make us into who he wants us to be. And for teens, I mean, my goodness, for teens, I've been watching more and more reels that show up in there, and they say, but, in teen world, and in the early years, it's like, I just need some downtime. I need some, and the person would say, no, go all in. Go all in on what you want to do. Figure it out. Work those hours. Apply yourself in school. Why? Because it's going to pay off later. Instead of dragging now and then trying to ramp up later, do it now so you set yourself up mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially later, because it will come quick. We had the conversation in the house the other day, how January just seemed to go by really slow, but February went really quick. And I told my two oldest, I go, oh, you have no idea. Once you get out of high school, you're going to be, where did the time go? You get that 5-year reunion invite to your class reunion. Next thing you know, 30th? It's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So I guess my advice in point number 3 is embrace the refining fire. Because God's process produces precious vessels. Let me back up. Change your perspective. Let the clay come off and shine like gold. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6-7 says, in all of this, you greatly rejoice. Though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief and all kinds of trials, these have come so that proven genuineness of your faith of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Fact is, uncomfortable people and situations are not there to defeat you. They're there to develop you. We could all look back on a situation in our life that challenged us and look at who we are today. 21 years ago, as an example, I was awful at doing a funeral. I was asked, but I never did one before. I was a youth pastor, got thrusted into being a pastor. And now, having walked that path, losing a mom, losing a dad, within a couple of years, learned to be way more sympathetic, learned way more to like, dude, your life got turned over. Dealing with baby dedications. I could do one when I was a youth pastor, but I'm like, here you go, German festation, here you know. I didn't have kids, I wasn't married, and I was asked to do baby dedications. Weird thing. But then I had my own. And I'm like, these are precious moments. These are moments that you never forget. So what you go through, the refining that you go through, whatever your situation is, God's setting you up to do something even better and to help develop you, because you have a role to play now. You've walked the path that someone else in this church or somebody else you know has not walked that path, but they need insight. They need to survive. They need to make it. And they realize, you know what? So-and-so walked through that. I need to lean on them. I need their help. Because you've walked it, and your reputation, your testimony is speaking loudly, and now they're going to come to you for the help they need to get through it. I found this interesting. In 1955, in Thailand, there was a clay statue that was believed to be valuable clay from the 14th century, but revealed solid gold underneath when carefully lifted and some clay broke off. Can you imagine? It was some kind of a Buddha statue, but it was going into a museum, into a big hall, and for 14th century, they're moving this thing and a chunk of clay falls off. Number one, your heart falls to the ground like, oh no, someone's going to get fired today. But all of a sudden they realized, true story, that underneath that clay was gold. Similarly, they lifted all of that clay off of it, and they revealed this, in all rights, it was a gold statue, solid gold statue. And similarly, our struggles and irritations are just like clay covering what God has designed. A golden character. And when we learn patience, when we learn forgiveness, when we learn kindness, even when it's difficult, that clay is coming off and it's revealing your true character. You could have been a very mean person at one time in your life. But now all of a sudden, you've learned to settle down, hear stories, and work around that. Why? Because God has revealed something in you. You have authority in a situation because you've walked that path, and God has revealed that in you, and He's using you to tell other people how to work through those situations. So ultimately, we embrace God's process of letting go of sinful attitudes, of areas we want to hang on to, and we grow in grace. And we choose daily to respond differently to irritations, to hardships, to offenses taken to us. And offenses can happen probably even more so in the church world. There was a sign, and I don't have it up I have it anymore that I could find it, but it was a street sign. And it was, somebody made it into something else, but it's one guy, a stick figure running with another one behind them with a knife going for their back, and it said, "Caution, Christians at play." I was like, ooh, that hurt. Fact is, in the Christian world, offenses can be even more. Okay? Why is that? Because sometimes we don't expect those kind of hurts to come from the church. Somebody let you down, somebody backstabbed you, somebody's gossiping about you. And there were moments that I remember growing up, and I'm like, Mom, oh my goodness, you hang on to a grudge for a long time, or so-and-so, whatever the situation is. But there comes a point where everybody that I saw in that situation, they moved on. And they became people that would actually extinguish any offenses or hurts or bitterness or anything like that. It was as if God took him and said, okay, we're going to go through a process here because you're an old churchy word here. You're a pillar of the church. Younger people are looking up to you. Be that role model. It happens in all size churches, whether it's a faith community church or a smaller congregation like Radiant Fellowship. The little kids, hear me teens, the little kids, even though they don't mention it, they always look up to the teens. There's this thing saying, I want to be in youth groups someday. And they look up to the teens. What you're doing, what you're saying, how you're acting, they're watching that. And as teens start looking up to the adults in the church. And so adults, we have to be careful how we act, what we do, what we say, and all these things. Jeannie Mayo, a youth pastor leader now that's gone into a mentoring role, has said that the younger generation is going to live the unedited version of who you are. So what we do, they're going to take it one step further and say, this must be okay then. However, we're always being watched, and we can be a role model. That's biblical, isn't it? Mentorship and women teaching women, and on we go. So what we do is that we ultimately embrace the refining fire. God's process produces precious vessels. Seems like I just said that. 2 Timothy chapter 2, 20 and 21 says, in a large house there are articles not only for gold and silver, but also of wood and clay. Some are for special purposes and some are for common use. Those who cleanse themselves from the latter will be instruments for special purposes, made holy, useful to the master, and prepared to do any good work. So as we said, trials refine faith like fire purifies gold. What's that trial you're going through this week? How are you going to let God use that to form you and shape you? And it comes at all ages. For kids, it could be a grade in school. It could be that pesky kid that keeps bugging you. It could be that teacher that just doesn't get you. As adults, it looks different, doesn't it? Whatever our situations can be as adults. But pressure tests who we are inside and brings weakness to light. My pot blew up. The pressure brought it to light. It wasn't just one of those things where the teacher could just have a one-on-one with me. There's 7 kids behind her like, you stink. You weren't listening. Pressure can bring things to light and say, okay, if you're willing to work through this, there's going to be a swallowing of pride. There's going to be, understand there's a dependence on God. But if you bear with it, it's going to be okay. Again, if it's something we're dealing with and we just say, I didn't know, there's an old saying, you don't know what you don't know. And people have to be okay with that. And so you reach out and say, can you help me? Can you help me in this situation? And we reach out to God and say, God, can you show me? Can you help me in this situation? And like Peter, who denied Jesus under pressure, but was refined through the process, we must stay on the potter's wheel, passing each test with faith and patience. Because God won't settle for clay. He's not going to settle for wood vessels. He's working to make us a vessel of gold. A vessel that is really, God would look at and say, there we go. That's what we're looking for. It takes time. And we can lose patience in time. You ever gone up to a railroad crossing, specifically on Stevens Point on that one road? It goes into the business district. I was running late for a meeting, and I was literally waiting for that train to go by. And it's right on the line that shoots along Highway 10. Highway 10. And you're sitting there, and however the tracks are situated, you're like, okay, let's keep it going, keep it moving. But for some reason, there's a station around there somewhere. You're in a hurry. You're waiting for the train. It's slowing down. And you're like, okay, maybe it's because they're coming into a more rural area, or they're coming into the city even more. I don't know. I don't understand trains. You're like, okay, it'll speed up. It slows down more. And then eventually you're like, it's stopping. It's literally stopping right here. Great. And God's up there like, okay, hang on. Or he's nudging somebody up there. He's like, watch this. He's going to blow his stack. Okay. And then to make matters worse, You're sitting there like, okay, it's stopped. It'll get going again. It's going in reverse now. Okay. And you're like, what is going on here? And then eventually it gets going again. And you're like, I don't know what just happened there. I was caught in an alternate universe here somewhere. Something happened. But when you leave, it's like, okay, you can get mad, but then you're like, it's a train. It's out of your control. There are situations like that. It's just out of your control. But God, help me get through this. Help me work through this. I'm under pressure right now, and I feel like I'm going to explode. Help me get through this. Name it. What is it you're dealing with? What is it you need God's guidance on? What area do you need wisdom on? In what area could we reach out to somebody and say, can you help me through this? And watch what God does when we're able to say, I need help in these areas. So we have to trust God's timing and sovereignty amid setbacks. Instead of stress, the choice is to relax. It is what it is. So I would urge us in clothing and worship team, you can come up, ushers, you can come up as well. I would say don't waste another year stuck in the same old patterns. 2026 is still early. What is it do you feel God is wanting you to do in your life this year? What is that thing that you're thinking God is I think he's wanting to do something in my life this year? And then think about, okay, now what areas do I feel God's telling me I got to work on? I promise you, when you start hearing that, and a lot of times, you know what? It's like when we were in school, you knew what you needed to do to get a better grade. You just had to do it. But God reveals those things to us, and so we have to be willing to change and to grow, to let that clay fall away and let God reveal what he wants to do in our lives. It's not comfortable for a blob of clay to sit on a potter's wheel. It's not comfortable for the potter either. You're just moving all over the place with it. But when you see the finished product, you know it's all worth it. And you can see the full purpose of it. Amen.